Hello, welcome. This is Jules Paradian. This video is going to be an overview of the spiral dynamics model of consciousness progression. And I'm just going to jump right in and start describing it. So if you prefer to have some context first about what those terms mean, I have a previous video that I will link in the description below. Also, this is my take on spiral dynamics from my research and my own personal experiences and observations. There are many other overviews of spiral dynamics, and each person has their own unique perspective on this model. This one is mine. So let's look at some spirals. So the spiral dynamics model is traditionally depicted vertically like this, where it starts small at the bottom and it expands as it goes up like this. There are advantages to depicting it like this because it kind of is a way of looking at how one's level of vibration increases as one progresses in consciousness. And I also like that it expands the loops so that they're bigger and bigger as they get to the top, because that is a great way of modeling how your consciousness expands, your idea of yourself expands, and your idea of your world and reality expands as you progress in consciousness. What I don't like about depicting it like this is that it's really easy to look at this and think hierarchy, that the people at the top are bigger and better than these little peons down at the bottom. And that is not what consciousness progression is about. So I actually prefer to depict it like this, with the spiral on its side like this, progressing along time to the side horizontally, and with the loops as the same width, the same height, so that it gives this sense of equality and it takes away this idea of hierarchy. And if you expand the spiral even further, if you stretch it out further, then it starts to look like this. So this is like we're viewing a spring on its side, and it's a stretched out spring. And what I like about this is you can really see what's going on. You can see these peaks and valleys, and each peak and each valley is a stage of consciousness. So this is a stage of consciousness, this is a stage of consciousness, this is a stage of consciousness, etc. And the spiral dynamics model in particular labels these stages of consciousness with color names, which is really handy because a lot of these other models use numbers or they use cryptic letter combinations that are difficult to remember. But the colors make a handy mnemonic device. They're also really pretty. So here's my depiction of the spiral dynamics model in color with the color names for the stages. And there are 12 stages that have been mapped so far. Beck and Christopher Cowan only named the stages up through coral. So beige, here's the first stage, and then it goes sequentially like this up to coral. They described the stages from beige through turquoise. And coral, I believe they chose not to describe, stating that they didn't have enough data, which is valid, because as you get further along in the spiral, fewer and fewer people exist who are at these stages of consciousness, so it gets much, much harder to collect data. And then the rest of these stages, these last 3 stages, have been added by other people who have expanded this model. And there are disagreements about what to call these stages. I happen to use teal, plum, and aubergine, which I believe are names that were chosen by Peter Mary, but I'm not entirely certain about that. And each of these stages can be used to describe both individual human development and anything made of humans or made by humans. For example, organizations, companies, cultures, ideas, memes, and even all of humanity. So for this overview, to give a sense of that breadth, I'll attempt to describe both ends of that spectrum, individual development and roughly how each stage that we have reached as a species may have first manifested in human history. So let's start with Beige. For an individual in Beige, the primary concern is survival. This is meeting basic needs. So food, water, sleep. Very little, if any, sense of self or others are at this stage. And examples include babies. We all start somewhere. We all start in Beige. When we're babies, we all start in Beige. And there are other examples even in adults. For example, recovering from severe illness or injury, or going through the shock of severe crisis. Even the initial stage of living in the wilderness if one is not prepared for it. So those are examples of the individual human experience of Beige stage of consciousness. As far as the history of humanity, we're talking really early humanity. So early tools, fire. That's the kind of stage that we're talking about in the development of humans. The next stage comes out of the first stage. Each stage is produced by the stage prior to it. So in Beige, the concern is primarily survival. And as a social species, we survive best when we're in groups. So the purple stage is discovering how to be in a group. For an individual, this is strongly identifying with a small group, so a family or a social group. And it's about developing social skills. There's also the development of stories and meaning, traditions. This is the stage where you really start genuinely caring for each other. You have respect for elders and people who have been around the block in your group. There's a sense of group pride often. And this is also where often there's the beginning sort of naive relationship to magic. In terms of human history, we're talking early tribes, oral histories, early animistic religions, the beginnings of artistic expression. So that's the kind of stage that is purple in human history. Now, please don't use this historical overview I'm giving to support a colonialist or racist perspective on contemporary cultures. I am talking about stages in history where these stages of consciousness first arose. So when I'm talking about early tribes, I'm talking about an existence of humanity where we had not yet discovered these future stages of consciousness. In contemporary cultures, just because a group of people lives in a village in the jungle today does not mean that they are less developed than people in cities. They could easily be in stage green, for example. And a close-knit, cliquish friend group in an urban school could be an excellent example of a purple stage culture. So in this example, I am describing purple stage cultures, what they may have been like before the discovery of further stages of existence. The next stage that comes from purple is red. When you're in purple stage and you're identifying with a group, once you feel safe and secure, the next thing that shows up often is this sense of, well, wait, I don't want to sacrifice all of my work for the group anymore. I want to be myself. I want to be my own person. So red is, for an individual, the first strong sense of individual self, personal power. This is also where courage comes online, pride in oneself, personal glory, and what I like to call badassitude. In terms of human history, when we were first discovering red stage, cultures we're talking warring cultures, conquering cultures, warrior kings, and legendary heroes, a focus on and even sort of a worship of legendary heroes. And we also see this in cultures today. I mean, there is definitely glory in courageous acts in modern cultures too. So these early stages, they don't go away. They just become incorporated This is a cumulative model of consciousness development. What comes from red is blue. And what often moves somebody from red to blue is in red is a very impulsive stage. There's not much concern for future. It's rather short-sighted. So what can happen is a person does something impulsively and something bad happens, something really bad happens. And that can make the person go, whoa, wait, I don't want that to ever happen again. How do I prevent that from ever happening again? And that moves them into blue. Blue, for an individual, is, we're talking structure, rules. It's all about safety. And again, it's identifying with, in this case, a larger group than purple, usually. And the group is probably hierarchical. So maybe a school, church, company, or even nation. And there's a comfort and satisfaction in blue of knowing one's role and doing it well. And there's also faith in authority to make correct decisions. In terms of human history, when blue started coming online in human consciousness, this is where we saw the advent of governments, laws, highly structured religions, massive building projects that could only be done with many people, and cities. So you might have noticed at this point that there's this alternating effect happening, which I call the pendulum effect. In beige, there's a focus on the individual survival. In purple, there's a focus on group. There's this identifying with group. In red, again, the focus is on identifying as an individual. And then in blue, again, the focus is on identifying with a group. And this continues throughout consciousness progression, this alternation. And I'll probably talk about that more in a future video. But this helps to understand how these stages are causing each other, generating each other, is this swing from individual to group identity as we're exploring our consciousness. So what comes out of blue is orange. And the impetus for that shift is often kind of similar to the impetus from purple to red, where in blue, you're identifying with a group. All of your work is going toward the group and knowing your place in the group. If someone doesn't fit in the group, because blue is a very homogeneous kind of group, they can get kicked out of the group or even just kind of socially ostracized, even if it's not explicit, and that can push them into orange. Or if they're in the group, even if they're successful in the group, they might feel, an individual might feel dissatisfaction at some point, where they want to explore something that doesn't fit in the rigid structure of blue. They want to innovate. They want to come up with something new. They want to figure out who they are as an individual person, and that can push them into orange. Orange is, again, an individual stage. It's where a person is identifying more as an individual, and they're developing a more complex personal identity. This is where logic and analysis come online, intentional experimentation, innovation, self-improvement, personal achievement, and exploring what makes one feel happy and or fulfilled in the external material world. In terms of human development over the course of human history, this is where science and business really start to become central to cultures. What comes out of orange is green. And green is another group stage, but it is a much bigger group identification. Now, the individual is identifying more with all of humanity, or even more than humanity. For example, plants, animals, the planet itself. This is where we see relativism show up. caring deeply about large scope or even global causes, rejecting power structures, rejecting the power structures of blue and red and purple, rejecting all of those power structures, developing authenticity and vulnerability, paying more conscious attention to the different parts of the self. So in orange, the conscious self is really developed. In green, there's now more awareness that there are different parts to the self. There's this inner self or subconscious, and then there's the conscious, and then there's this superconscious or higher self. And green becomes much more aware of those different parts of the self. In green, the individual also is probably exploring interests and creativity and what makes them feel happy and or fulfilled in subtler ways, like being in nature, connecting with people, and being of service. And this is where people begin to discover or develop a direct personal relationship to spirituality. In terms of human development, this is a fairly recent discovery. This is where we see flat hierarchy, diverse communities where people feel belonging because everyone is different rather than because everyone is the same. There's a focus on social justice and environmental issues and socialized healthcare and things like that. At this point, something shifts between green and yellow. There's a big shift between green and yellow. So much so that all the 6 stages before this point, Don Beck and Christopher Cowan called Tier 1, and the stages after this shift, they called Tier 2. And the differences between Tier 1 and Tier 2 are that in Tier 1, the person or the culture is exploring the physical world primarily. And in Tier 2, this is where the person or the culture begins to explore what one might call the spiritual world. And at this point, I'm going to end this video as a part 1, and then continue with another video that will be part 2, and will cover Tier 2 of this overview of spiral dynamics. So this was just part 1 of an overview of the spiral dynamics model. I will do a part 2, and in the meantime, like this video, post comments and questions below that I will respond to, and subscribe and hit the bell so that you know when part 2 comes out. And in the meantime, I will put some links in the description for further research that you can do on your own if you'd like. See you soon.